is ready. Mike is ready. I'm ready. But I guess the important question is, are you ready, my friends? Hey, welcome to the Mykel Broady podcast. This is Mykel Broady. Thank you so much for listening today. This is the 5th episode of our extraordinary, phenomenal, sensational, oxymoronic gem 2nd season, the 11th episode overall. Thank you so much to the listeners for rocking with me, for sticking with me. If this is your first time listening, thank you as well and welcome. You're in for a treat, trust me. So what are we talking about? Well, another oxymoron, my friends. Entry-level leaders. Pause for dramatic effect. Repeat again. Entry-level leaders. It's a two-parter, and so the first part is entry-level or junior employees that lead without the formal title. How do they do that? Why is that so important for the organization? We'll discuss that. And the second part is senior leaders or executives. How can they not only engage with entry-level, but empower them to see their full potential? I love this because I feel it ties to destroying the spotlight. And I always kind of chuckle in the back of my head when I say destroying the spotlight because it sounds so harsh. What are we destroying, Mykel? This sounds very aggressive. It's really not. Essentially, what destroying the spotlight means to me is using your platform, using your position, using the authority you have to redistribute the spotlight to all those that really made it happen, that allowed this success to take place. And I'm joined today, as you typically know that I say, by someone who exemplifies this topic. But I figure we do something different. Before bringing him in and mentioning his name, I want to share how I came to this conclusion, how I initially met him and saw him as someone who does destroy the spotlight. This gentleman, who shall remain nameless for dramatic effect, I got introduced to him by a mutual friend named Alex Price. Alex, if you're listening to this, thank you so much for everything. Excited for our next conversation. But I got introduced to this gentleman, and we had a conversation coming up to chat. And I was doing my research as I typically do, and I stumbled across an article from about 2016 when he was awarded the FAU Business Leader of the Year. And so as I'm reading, trying to learn more about this gentleman, what I stumbled across was he said, individuals are often recognized for the work that teams do. Later on in the article, he went on to thank his family for just sticking with him, for sacrificing so much as on his way to his extraordinary career. He also went on to thank his friends that have been so supportive to him. He then went on to thank all of the employees at ADT that helped make this award possible. And so I'm joined today by someone who truly exemplifies entry-level leaders, who truly exemplifies destroying the spotlight. But before I say his name, I must say some of his titles, but I'm not going to start with the business ones. I'm going to talk about the ones that are foundational, the ones that mean so much to him. I'm joined today by Naren Gursahani. He is a loving husband and father, a genuine friend, an extraordinary mentor, an honorable alumni, a caring leader. And oh yeah, by the way, he's the current chairman of the Board of Directors for Terminix. He serves on the Board of Directors for NextEra Energy. He was recently appointed as a member of the Board of Trustees for Penn State University. And lastly, although I can keep this going for a while, he was the former CEO of ADT for about 9 years, up until 2016. Again, I'm joined by Naren Gursahaney. Thank you, Naren, for joining us. Please greet yourself to our extraordinary listeners.
Well, thank you, Mykel, and thank you for inviting me to join you with that kind of introductions. You really created some big shoes that I have to fill, so hopefully I can live up to your expectations during this podcast. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining. You absolutely will. I have no doubt about that. Before we get into the questions, though, I want to update the audience to show how we really came full circle here. When I first spoke to you in August, I was telling you, the kernel of an idea I had of the Mykel Broady podcast. I was telling you how, I've been talking to a lot of professionals, a lot of inspiring conversations, but, I feel like, how can I share this with others? How can I open up my mind to the world to learn at a higher level? And so it's awesome that we have this opportunity today to have an extraordinary conversation to talk about some of the same really helpful questions that we discussed the first time, but this time on a global stage, this time so others can learn as well. Are you ready to get started, my friend?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. And so the first question I want to start off with is, what skill or ability, quality do you feel is critical to have as it relates to destroying the spotlight?
For me, it's always been about the ability to build a great team. How do you surround yourself with top talent that's willing to work together in pursuit of a mission? And I know leaders always talk about you got to surround yourself by people who are better than you. But it takes a lot to do that. You have to have the self-confidence that they won't outshine you and that they will work together and allow you to become better as a leader. So for me, it's always been about how do I surround myself with incredible talent that wants to do something great.
I love that. That really speaks to also having the humility, like you said, right? To know that these people are bright minds, maybe even brighter than yours, but you're all pursuing the same mission and you're doing it at the highest level. A kind of quality that I thought when I thought of the question was gratitude, right? Just being grateful for the employees you do have, the work that they do. And so it might have been impossible for you at that moment to receive such an honorable award from FAU and say, yes, thank you everyone for the credit, because you realized how many people really were a part of that. And so do you feel like gratitude fits in there as well?
Absolutely. And I would add one more characteristic, and that's trust. Because if you surround yourself with great people and then you go tell them what to do, then you're still limited by your own ideas, your own capability. But if you surround yourself with great people and trust them to do the right things, then you're truly empowering them and they will make you better. So learn that in many cases the hard way, but when you do trust them, they prove you right more than they prove you wrong.
All right, then, Naren, you're dropping gems already. Well, let's get started. Let's get started with the majority of our conversation here. And I want to start us off at your journey with part one of entry-level leaders. When you were entry-level, how did you lead? Can you give us a high-level overview? What were your earlier days in business like? Maybe some of the organizations you were a part of, tasks that you did. Update us, man.
Sure. I mean, I started out undergrad at Penn State, as you mentioned, and I was an engineer. I started out in a rotational program, and I was doing project work, grunt work. My first assignment, was sitting in a lab, dipping leads into a solder pot and measuring, how well the adhesion was going. And the people who weren't sitting in that lab with me thought I had the coolest job in the world because very few people got the opportunity to go into the lab. I thought it was one of the most boring things I had ever done because I was literally sitting there dipping leads into a solder pot, taking some measurements and going on to the next one. It was very repetitive and I was working alone. So it wasn't the most exciting job I had. Fortunately, I moved on to other projects from there and went through my rotations and found a home in Westinghouse's electronics business and worked in supplier quality for a couple of years. Got to spend some time in the Baltimore area. Actually got to live overseas for a couple of years, which was an incredible experience for a kid who was 23 years old. And then kind of went from there and climbed the ladder. Went back and got an advanced degree in business, got my MBA, did a little gig in consulting for a while with Booz Allen, then went to GE, and that's really where I got the opportunity to lead organizations and ultimately lead businesses. That extended on to my time in Tyco, and then we spun off ADT from Tyco, and I got to be a public company CEO, which was kind of my dream all along. So, I'm truly a product of my past. Everything I did hopefully led me to the next opportunity and the ultimate opportunities that I got.
Mm-hmm. It was cool to hear your story too. I'm sure even those that know you that are listening to this are probably like, it's even crazy to think that he had earlier days in business where he was doing grunt work, because you've been a leader in business for so long. But I do want to talk about, your experience prior to GE, prior to when you really started getting the former leadership titles. What were some notable ways you led without the formal title?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it was taking leadership of either projects or initiatives that nobody wanted to do. it's easy to go fill a void that exists because people aren't running to go do that job. And I'll give you, one example. When I was at Westinghouse working in supplier quality, the strategy for supplier quality until that point in time had been to inspect the products that our suppliers made, and we had either a source inspection or incoming inspection. And talking to my boss, he said, we really need to change the game here and certify processes, and then have the confidence that the products will be made correctly if we have all the right processes in place. We'll do a first piece inspection, but then we won't have to inspect every product that comes in. And he kind of said, we need to create this program. And, everybody else in my department, first of all, had a lot more experience than I did, but they also had a lot more work to do than I did. They had, projects that they were working on. They had suppliers that they were assigned to. So I had the capacity to kind of do a lot of the administrative stuff. I didn't have the technical expertise to put together all of the questionnaires that we would go through to validate a process, but at least I could do all the administrative stuff and hand it to to my peers or the other people in the organization and leverage their technical expertise. But pulling all of that stuff together, defining what work needed to be done, and delegating that work to people who should have been delegating work to me, gave me the opportunity to show my boss that I am capable of leading, even though I wasn't a manager and I wasn't an appointed leader. That project got all kinds of recognition and everything, and ultimately it's probably what got me the opportunity to go take an overseas assignment that people my age just didn't get. So.
What I heard a lot from that was stepping up to the plate when no one else is. Asking yourself inside, if not me, then who?
Exactly.
I like that.
And like I said, it's easy to lead when there's a void there and nobody wants to lead.
Right. And what were some of the roadblocks internally or externally that you ran into when leading at this time? I know you kind of touched on one, which is the fact that people are more senior, they have more work than you potentially. What were some others that you noticed?
Yeah, well, I think that what we were trying to do was somewhat transformational within the operation that we were doing. And as a result, people were threatened by that because this is the way we do things. And if you change the way we do things, then all of a sudden, maybe my skills and expertise isn't as relevant. So it was a lot of communication to them, but there was also a lot of when did I engage my boss and when did I need him to tell the story versus me telling the story. It was a lot of selling. And you had to show people why it was better for the organization, for the business, and over time, how it would be better for them as well.
What about internally? Was it hard at first, or did you have any barriers mentally in pursuing something that hasn't been done before when so many people around you are saying, that's not protocol, bro. That's not how we do things. What were you telling yourself?
It was hard because there was no playbook. It wasn't that I could go to a peer, my boss, and say, how do you do this? Because nobody had done it before. I was fortunate to have a boss who was, he was the visionary. Here's where we want to go. And to some extent, he had done it before overseas. So there may not have been a playbook, but I could tap into his experience. So I had to ask him a lot of questions, but it was, it was all new, and it was especially new for me. I was in a new business with a new team, still earning my credibility with the team, and fortunately, this was a way for me to accelerate gaining credibility with my peers.
Absolutely. And so there's one. I was going to ask you my next question. You spoke on value earlier, and I want to see, can you describe the value you saw in leading at this time without the formal title? And I know you just brought up one, being able to connect with your peers better. Are there some other things that stand out as well?
Yeah, well, it's about making your mark. One of the best quotes that I ever heard was from Jack Welch at GE. And he told me, this was years later, but he told me the role of a leader is to drive change. We don't put you into a job to, quote, do the job. Anybody can do the job. Leaders drive change and make the business better, make the job better, make the organization better. If you're just, quote, running the business, that's not what we're paying you to do. And that really stuck with me. And every job I went into, it was about how do you make either the business better, that function better, or myself better. through driving change.
And everyone's responsible for that.
Absolutely. Well, and especially within the GE culture back then, is if you weren't able to demonstrate your ability to drive change, you weren't going to continue to move up the ladder. A required skill for success in that business. So you had to understand that was your job, and then you had to do your job well.
Understood. Now, I love hearing your story, Naren, but you got to understand, and I know you know this, but there's some people out there in entry level that are probably feeling dejected right now, right? Maybe they're tired of feeling like they've been muted, or they struggle to see what contribution they have to the overall organization. What advice would you give to these extraordinary leaders in entry level that are discouraged, but maybe tired of being muted, yet hungry to contribute?
That's a great question. And all I would say is there are lots of opportunities to lead. It may not be on the project that you're spending 80% of your time on that you're assigned to. You know, every organization in the world right now is doing something in community service. They're doing something to try and give back to the community. So there's opportunities to lead in that environment as well. And many people don't have the desire and appetite to do that, but that's another opportunity for you to show people what leadership skills you have and what those capabilities are. And it's also a great way to refine your leadership skills, you know, to learn what works and learn what doesn't work in an area that, you know, may be a little less threatening. Now, you may not feel it's as important, but I can tell you, you know, as I've progressed in my career, what I do with my team outside of our day-to-day business is really important because it builds teamwork, it builds camaraderie, and giving back to the community is a big part of what every company does these days.
It almost reinforced what you said earlier, how you're saying there's a lot of opportunity out there. It's just a matter of, will you seize it or not? Yeah. Are you going to fill that gap? And it's that matter of self-accountability in a way.
Yeah.
Huh.
And
I love that.
And again, you learn just as much, you know, leading a philanthropic project or a community service project as you do leading an engineering development project. It's the same skill set. It's understanding what resources you have and how do we garner those resources to achieve a goal.
So don't underestimate the opportunity to learn, depending on what it's made up of, right? So always being receptive and willing to learn whatever opportunity you find yourself in.
Yeah, and you might find a new passion too. I mean, you talked about Alex Price earlier, how he introduced us. Alex, you know, was in a communications and marketing organization, got involved with community service, and that became his passion, and that's his career now.
Wow. I had no idea, by the way. That is amazing. Alex, you should have told me the story way earlier, but I'm glad I can hear it now. Naren, I got another question as we kind of wrap up part one of entry-level leaders. Why don't we see maybe and/or acknowledge more people leading without a formal title? What can we do to help inspire a broader movement, perhaps?
I think it's a great point. It really comes down to when you're in a position to give back and help people develop. So I think it comes to encouragement and opportunity. It's creating those opportunities. It may not be a big project. It may be a small piece of a project, but allowing people to take ownership and leadership, provide them the guidance that they need, providing the coaching, but really seeing what people are capable of doing. I think, you know, and again, this goes back to my comment earlier around surrounding yourself with great people and then letting them do their thing. Often you find yourself in the trap of telling people how you would do the job and expecting them to do the job the way you would and judging them on how close to, you know, the way you would do it they did it. And I just think that's, you know, one, it's not an effective use of your time, and two, it doesn't create the opportunity for them to grow and develop and create their own, their own playbook for the future. So it's giving them the opportunity, giving them the encouragement, but then letting them do it their way. There's a lot of different ways a task can get done.
All those are huge, and I'm glad you expanded so much further than where my mind was at the moment. I was thinking just on a basic friend level for myself, how can I empower those like my peers, right? I'm in college right now. There's probably plenty of my peers that are looking towards going into entry level following college. And something that I need to do perhaps is just encourage them. Hey, bet on yourself. Believe in yourself. I think when you tackle these unknown projects or maybe projects that aren't your forte traditionally, you don't know the how. You don't know how you're going to do it. But I think that's irrelevant. However, I think that's where a lot of people in entry level typically get caught up on is, I've never done this before. This is not my thing. Make it your thing. Make it you. Bring your perspective to the table because it's never been seen before. And so I love all of this, Naren.
Yeah. Well, and remember, the leaders don't have to have all the answers. The leaders have to have the answers somewhere in the organization, and then they have to bring those answers out of the people and the teams that they've built. I can assure you, in 90% of my job, I didn't have the answers going in. I went into some areas that I didn't understand the business and had to learn on the fly, and I was fortunate that people in the business were able to teach me, even though I was in the leadership position.
I'm writing this down as we speak on the note card. Leaders don't have to know all the answers, but they should know how to find them. I love that. Let's move on to part 2, because lucky for you, you haven't just been on entry level. You've seen the top of the totem pole in business as well. You've been a CEO before. You've been the chairman of the board of directors. And so I want to talk about that now. How can we empower? How can we engage with those on entry level? But specifically, before we get into that, what entry level elements did you take with you to the C-suite?
I would say the most important was asking questions and listening. Intellectual curiosity. You have to have it as an entry level person because you're in a new situation. In a new business, you're just learning. You're learning the company. You're learning your job. You're learning your peers. So you've got to be, inquisitive, and you've got to have that appetite for continuous learning. I would say you can never lose that through your career. The world is so dynamic now. Businesses are changing. Businesses are getting disrupted all the time. And if you're not learning all the time and finding opportunities to learn, whether it's from your competitors, whether it's from your peers, whether it's from different industries, you're going to get passed up if you're not continuously learning these days.
Intellectual curiosity. I want to touch on also that self-accountability, though, because you developed that a lot in entry level by stepping up into different roles. How did you see that spill over to your time in the C-suite?
In the C-suite, it's easy to push accountability because you are accountable. The results are yours. Your scorecard is out there. If you're a public company, your scorecard is out there every day based on your stock price. You have good days and you have bad days. So the accountability kind of comes with the job. Hopefully, you have demonstrated accountability for results well before you get that job. And the reality is you probably don't get it unless you've shown that you have accountability for results. So, like I said, for me, it was there when I got there. I do take results seriously. There's a lot of people counting on you as the CEO, not just your team and the people you work with, but their families. If businesses go south, you start laying off people lose jobs, that impacts families. You don't want to be in that situation. You want to be leading a business that's continuing to grow and adding more people because you're getting bigger. And that's, that is it's a lot of responsibility. So you got to step up to the plate.
Sure do. And that makes perfect sense, by the way. I'm glad that you clarified that for me. I want to move into another question. And I know the people that have worked with you before, they're ready to get their popcorn ready because this is a fun one. What are some of the ways you engaged with and empowered your employees?
Oh, wow. I first and foremost, the last several years of my career, I worked in distributed organizations. ADT had 300 and some branches across the U.S. and Canada, and I like to be out in the field. I like to be doing ride-alongs with the sales guys, ride-along with the service techs. I like to be in the call centers, listening in to calls from customers, doing roundtable discussions. So, I prefer not to be sitting in my office worrying about the problems of the world, and being out with the team and really learning what issues they had, what opportunities they saw. And frankly, that's where I learned more about the business than I could ever learn from PowerPoint presentations of what was going on. So for me, it was, how do you get out there? Even when I was in the office, I'd have lunch sessions with a cross-section of the functional folks in the headquarters operation. I believe in management by walking around, just pop my head into somebody's office. What are you working on? And just trying to really engage with the team at all different levels.
You are very kind. Although these are tremendous examples, I also have to include one that Alex told me before we had this conversation. He told me, he said, he told me that during the interns would come by at ADT and you would be on a first name basis with them all the time. He would literally explain how you would walk into the room and be like, hey, Alex, hey, Jenny, how are you doing? And they would just be sitting there shocked because they didn't expect you to know them at that level. But obviously you see the value in that.
Culture is of the utmost importance in a company of any size. I don't care whether you're a startup or you're 100,000 employees. The culture is ultimately what dictates the behavior and frankly is what dictates the success. And your culture is going through continuous turnover. So the earlier I could get to people in their careers with ADT, the better chance I had of trying to communicate to them what the culture I wanted was. Otherwise, you get what you get. So I spent a lot of time with our summer interns when they came in, did roundtable discussions with them, encouraged them to pop by my office, encouraged them to invite me to lunch or breakfast or something. And usually the ones with the strong leadership skills would take me up on that offer. I'd also go through, we were a big sales organization at ADT, so a couple times a year I'd try to go spend time with the entry-level sales training program. Again, just making sure that we're teaching them the values, not just how to sell, but what the company was all about. So for me, it was all about getting to people as early in their journey as possible, so that we could, so I could be very clear about here's the culture we want to have in this company, and make sure that that's what we were focused on. It's funny, it wasn't just at ADT. I remember in my GE days, I took over the chief information officer of one of the business, and I was spending time with the the entry-level program. We had a program called the IMLP, Information Management Leadership Program. And as it turned out, one of the daughters of one of the more senior people in my organization was an IMLP. And when I finally got to meet him, he commented to me, he said, I've been in this organization for 20 years, and my daughter has now spent more time with you as the chief information officer than I have. I said, I apologize for that, but he kind of understood why I did it too.
Ah, man, I got to say, this is so encouraging to hear, and I speak on behalf of some of those individuals you met, although I can never fully express the gratitude they have for you. I'm sure they are feeling it right now as they are far ahead in their careers. Thank you, Naren, for taking that time to really be with them, to nourish that relationship, to ensure they're growing. I'm sure they have many more words and many more emotions to convey for how they feel about you, Naren, but thank you for your work there.
Well, I can assure you whatever feelings they have for me, I have those same feelings for them and for those who gave me those same kind of opportunities, the leaders who reached out to me when I was young in my career, and there's a lot of them. So in many cases, I'm just copying what they taught me.
Exemplifying, destroying the spotlight, 30 minutes into the conversation still. I love it, Naren, and I gotta ask you, how did your engagement and empowerment make the organization you led better? And I know you touched on this through culture, and so can you take me through what was that culture like at ADT? What did you start to see over time as these entry-level leaders began to grow in their careers?
Yeah, well, I mean, we aspired to build a culture that was customer-centric. ADT is a recurring revenue business. We spent a lot of money to put a security system into your home, and we get that money back over time. So our business model was 3 years to cash break even, and then we start really making money. So the longer we could keep those customers, the better off the business was going to perform. And when I first got involved with the business back, I guess it was 2007, I had people tell me, we treat our new customers much better than we treat our existing customers. I said, well, that's a problem because we need to keep those existing customers past this amount of time. Otherwise, we never make any money. And I said, I didn't mean I want to treat my new customers any worse than we do, but we can't take our existing customers for granted. So for us, it was always about how do we make a customer-centric organization? And what I learned in my CEO tenure is you can't have a customer-centric organization if you don't have an employee-centric organization. Because if your customers are not your employees are not happy with the company, there's no way they're going to be great ambassadors for the company when they interact with our customers. And we were all about people. It was a service business. Every customer touch, I'd say 80% of them were people interactions. And I had to learn that we had to do a much better job of taking care of our employees so they felt good about the company. So when they engaged with our customers, they represented us well, and the same kind of passion we showed for them, they were able to show for our customers. So you had to do both.
Special shout out to my organizational behavior college professor, Brett Simmons, because what I'm hearing right now is a service profit chain. And this is exactly what we would talk about. He asked us one time, what's the ultimate goal in business? And as young business students, we all raised our hand. We're like, profit, make revenue. And then we kept going down the order. Well, how do you do that? And then eventually ended off at the employees. Yeah. It started with them. As long as they're happy, as long as they're passionate about the brand that they support, you're off to a great start. And so I love to hear the service profit chain coming back into full circle there. Thank you again, Brett Simmons.
No, I'd say, unfortunately, I learned the hard way because I said we're going to be customer-centric, and after about a year, we had to take a step back and said, okay, before we can be customer-centric, we have to be employee-centric. Let's get this right, and then things will follow.
And that I'm glad that I'm learning well. Then we're doing well, teaching our students well, I guess.
I wish I would have taken that class.
Hopefully, you're gonna lead a class, man. Go lead a class at Penn State. That's what they need. I gotta ask you though, with some of the individuals, the interns that you met with, did you see a change? I know it was hard to really monitor their behavior and their approach, but did they approach their work differently after they had that engagement with you that you noticed?
It was tough to say because I would see them over breakfast, over lunch, or when we did a community service project. Other than the summer internship report outs, I would say the biggest change that I saw was the level of confidence they had at the end of the summer versus the beginning of the summer for the summer intern programs, because they came in not knowing everything or anything in their minds, and they left as experts in certain areas. So the confidence that comes with that is just incredibly rewarding to see.
And that confidence is needed, as we spoke of earlier, that confidence to believe in yourself, to step up to these opportunities, to step up to the plate when you've never seen this before.
Absolutely.
Love that.
But going back to the service piece, you don't ask a customer how you can solve their problem unless you have the confidence that you can solve their problem. So that confidence is really important, and the access to the resources they need to do the job.
Great additions as well there. What advice would you give to current, future executives that struggle to see the value in engaging amidst their busy workloads? I know you're calling BS on this, but what advice would you give to them?
Like I said, first and foremost, take some time to figure out what you're spending your time on. Time is the most valuable and the most constrained resource you have in any kind of senior leadership role, and frankly, in any kind of job. So understanding how you're spending your time is one of the most valuable analyses that you can do. Then you can take a step back and say, okay, am I spending my time on those things that are critical to success? And then you got to put together your stop doing list. This is not adding to the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. So I got to find a way to stop doing it, to eliminate that work, or at least drive some productivity programs on there, so that you're truly spending 70 to 80% of your time on the stuff that's really important. At least my experience was I was never able to get to 100%, but if I can get to 70 to 80% of my time focused on what's really important to the organization, my productivity level went through the roof when I could get to that level.
Another gem for sure. And to me, I think back to, I had a conversation at one point with a college administrator somewhere, and he got to telling me about his new position, and he was saying, yeah, I'm kind of at the top here, but what's honest is I'm making the biggest decisions for our students, yet I'm now the furthest away from their voice.
Yeah.
And so as he got up, the less and less he heard on the ground level, the less he heard about what's the things happening day by day. Is that why there's also a need to stay grounded with entry level, so kind of the whereabouts, what's going on?
Absolutely. That ties back to my earlier comments about me being out in the branches, about doing the ride-alongs. You think you know everything until you spend the time out there and realize how they're really doing their jobs, what's really happening out in the field. Even if you think you know it today, rest assured that tomorrow it will change. So you got to make that time. And like I said, for ADT, our leadership team, we used to measure field visits. Every one of my direct reports, we had a scorecard on how many branches they got out to visit. And we changed what people would do. At first, they were going out there presenting. Over time, we realized very quickly that we had to get out there listening instead of talking. And those ride-alongs and everything. So, and no matter what function, even if you're in finance or if you're in marketing, everybody, human resources, everybody needed to spend time out in the field. So they understood, what our employees do every day. How do we satisfy what the customers want? And then they always came back with ideas.
Ideally, I would say this is the moment where you drop the mic, but I don't want to drop the mic on you quite yet, because as always on the Mykel Broady podcast, our special guest gives a challenge to you, the listener, and myself. And so as we're wrapping up here today, Naren, what challenge do you have for all of the listeners and myself?
To me, it goes back to your theme, the whole leadership. And to me, managers are appointed. Leaders evolve, and leaders find opportunities to lead regardless of what their situation is. And I just say, look for those opportunities to lead and develop your leadership skills. And then, in cases where you're not the leader, study the leaders that you're working for and understand the characteristics that those leaders have that you like, that inspire you, that motivate you, and the ones that you don't like that make you not want to work for them, and embrace and adopt and make the good ones your own. We're all a product of our past, a product of those who have invested in us. And so, I never tried to copy any one person, but there were always aspects of how a person led that I wanted to embrace and make my own. Again, not to name drop, but Jack Welch used to send out these handwritten notes to people. And when you got one of those, you felt like you were the most important person in the world. He had incredible handwriting, and it was just, back those days, if you were working international, he would fax the note to you. And they'd come across the fax machine, everybody would see it, very distinctive handwriting. And I tried to embrace that. And, you know, my handwriting is absolutely horrible, but I would force myself to at least do a couple handwritten notes every month. I'd have a stack of cards sitting on my desk, and when I had free time, I'd make sure that I did a couple of them. I ended up doing more emails than I did handwritten note, and trust me, that was better for everybody, because then I wouldn't get the phone call saying, "What the heck does this say?" But like I said, you pick up things from different leaders. You know, one of my bosses, instead of doing the performance check the boxes and everything, he used to write a letter to all of his to his team saying, "These are the things I ask you to do. These are the things I think you did great. These are the things you need to work a little bit more on. And here's why I'm excited about you being on the team as we go into this next year." That letter was a whole lot easier for me to understand than seeing what box he checked fulfills, satisfies, you know, all the, you know, the formulaic stuff. And, you know, so I started to do those.
Drop the mic, finally. I'm going to drop the pen for dramatic effect. Thank you, Naren. Managers are appointed, leaders evolve. How are you evolving today, my friends? Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mykel Broady podcast. Next week, what you can expect, we'll go into comfortably uncomfortable. I have a great friend, Chris, who's going to come join us and talk about his experience going to Europe with no friends, with no one to contact, but just be himself and learn in the process. So we have another tremendous episode coming up soon. Naren, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight. If people are wise, they should have a notebook page full of notes right now. And we're going to have an extraordinary day because of this conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Take care. Everyone have a great day. Let's hit the music that we all love.